I come from a place where there are a lot of grasshoppers and corn. It's a place called Nebraska. It's a unique state in America, and we grow a lot of corn there. In fact, in the summertime, you can stand out in the fields and just be real still, and you can hear the grasshoppers eating the corn. It's a most unusual sensation, but they're actually chewing on the leaves of the corn, and you can just hear this crunch, crunch, crunch. And, you know, every place has its specialties. Norway has got these big rocky fjords and gorgeous waterfalls, beautiful mountain scenes with the pine forests. We have got corn. Beautiful corn. And sometime I invite you to come and see it for yourselves. We also have there in Nebraska culture that is a unique culture where people like to just stand and talk very slow to one another. We probably have a number of Norwegians. Norwegians mostly immigrated to Minnesota in the United States, but most of our people in Nebraska are from Czechoslovakia, and we do have Russian, German background, but they'll stand and they'll talk, and they won't look at each other. They'll kind of fix their eyes on some distant point, and they'll stand side by side. Would you just come up here for a second? Like this. This is how a conversation in Nebraska happens. How are you doing? Good to see you. So what's been going on lately? We stand and we talk just like this. You know, you never stand and talk shoulder to shoulder, eye to eye. And thank you. That is good acting. Culture is all around us. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that make up cultures. And as you look in your lifetime as to why your Bible work is effective, why it's not been effective, one of the things you really want to analyze is, what am I communicating? What is my cultural worldview? And am I adapting to the worldview of the people that I'm working with? Some of you are working cross-culturally. You've gone from distant countries to work in Sweden, and you're like, why are these people doing the way things they are? Well, a lot of it has to do with the culture that they embrace, and we don't even know that we have it unless we stop and ponder it. In our modern day society, there are things that are valued seemingly universally, but we all know that there are uniquenesses. Germans like to get things done, and they're very good timekeepers. See, Christopher, when I asked him today, how much time do I have? He says, you are 9 minutes over. He knew right there. He was on to it. I spoke in Mannheim, Germany, and accidentally overspoke and haven't got invited back since then. So I know Chris has already struck me off. Christopher's already Christian has struck me off that list. But I'm just joking, of course. Boy, this one is not doing its job. Let me turn it off and on. Is it plugged? Is the USB? Check to see if the USB is in there. At AFM, Adventist Frontier Missions, we'd love to be known as the people on the front edge of missions. And we have sent a lot of workers out who've done some amazing things. One of the most amazing stories that I love is how AFM missionary Brad and Kathy Jolly got the work started in Mongolia. And we had no Adventist presence in Mongolia, absolutely none. The Lord put it on Brad's heart that he should go and start in Mongolia. Wasn't initiated by AFM, but Brad approached AFM and said, I'd like to go to Mongolia. Whether you support me or not, I'm going to go. And AFM said, we'd like to try to work together and make that happen. And so it turned out to be an excellent relationship, and Brad was able to raise the money he needed to go out with AFM. All AFM missionaries raise their own support. And the way we do that, my family, this Hope family, we have about 60 families that support us about $20 to $30 a month. And that money then is sent to Michigan, and from that, a certain portion of it goes to make the magazine. That's about 10% of all the funds go to support the production of the magazine, and then the rest of it goes towards, another 10% goes to administrative costs, and then the remaining 80% goes to our project, and that would include for AFM missionaries. And I tell you this because some of you might want to go sometime with AFM. Goes so you have insurance, you have your travel costs are covered, your salary is covered, your children's educational fund is covered, an emergency fund is involved there to evacuate you in case you need to get out quickly. Then you have some monies for ministry as well. So all of that is processed there, and it's a very good organization, a good group of people. I wish that we were larger. I wish that we had thousands of missionaries. There are Christian organizations that do have thousands of missionaries. One of them is, there we got it, is Bible translators. The Wycliffe Bible translators, amazing organization. They send out thousands of missionaries. And there are other good organizations. We have about 80 missionaries that are out serving right now. And in light of the need in the world, that's just not very many. And yet it's the amount that we've been able to put out into the field. Well, let's get on with this. I think this is the wrong show. This is the show they already saw. On that stick is one called Norway 2000 General AFM Worldview Norway 2015. You see that one? So Brad and Kathy Jolly launched out to Mongolia. And when they got there, it was a hard life. Those Mongolians did not have very much food to eat. And so Brad and Kathy Jolly, they had very little fresh vegetables all winter. Mongolians, you know what they eat during the winter is a lot of horse milk. They love horse milk, and so that's what they had to eat there. Well, to make the job even more difficult, there was not a Bible in the Mongolian language. Now, when I arrived in Turkey, I was so thankful that somebody else had already translated the Bible. That was somebody else's job. Oh, that's another thing that we did while we were in Turkey, is one of our partners produced a Seventh-day Adventist hymnal. And we now have a hymnal. But you don't think about these kind of things, resources that are so important for a church. And Brad and Kathy in Mongolia, they didn't even have a Bible. And Brad began to translate the Bible into Mongolian. Now that took a lot of work, as you can imagine, because he had to learn Mongolian first. And God gifts certain people with amazing skill. It's taken me about 9 of my 10 years to learn Turkish. I mean, it's like words just, my mind is like a Teflon skillet, you know. The words just come on and they're gone. And but other people, language is just their gift. Well, Brad and Kathy got a small group going, and by God's grace, there are now 3,000 Seventh-day Adventists in Mongolia. So praise to the Lord. Brad unfortunately got cancer while he was there on his 8th year in Mongolia. Got cancer from, they have coal dust that's so heavy in the air, and it seems that he ingested so much coal dust that he died of cancer. But his wife Kathy has been very active in translation of materials into Mongolian, and they early on met a young man who accepted Jesus. His name is Bold, B-O-L-D. Great name for an early apostle for their Mongolian people. He went to the seminary at Andrews University and has just been a tremendous evangelist, and the church is thriving in Mongolia, thanks to one man's family and AFM supporting them and making it happen for them. In the book of Education, it says this on page 262, "Success in any line demands a definite aim. He who would achieve true success in life must keep steadily in view the aim worthy of his endeavor. Such an aim is set before the youth of today. The heaven-appointed purpose of giving the gospel to the world in this generation is the noblest that can appeal to any human being. It opens a field of effort to everyone whose heart Christ has touched." Some of you have been asking me about life purpose while we've been here, and you're struggling to find what it is that you're supposed to do. Did you catch the words here? It said, giving the gospel to the world in this generation is the noblest purpose. Could you embrace that? What would be this generation? This would be about the next 40 years. That's what you've got for a generation. Can you do it? Could you get the gospel to the whole world? It means you might have to step up in new leadership ways. It might mean that you would have to set aside other goals and embrace new ones. Could you take it upon yourself? I want to show you some positive news about SDA Global Missions. And this is the total countries that we have entered. 230 countries of the world. We're in about 229 of them, and or 215 of them, something like that. So that's good news. Adventists have entered into these countries. Now, living here in Sweden, you know that just because a church has a presence doesn't necessarily mean that that presence is powerful, right? Well, our membership continues to grow, and I think that we've got about 18 million members around the world. That's good news. The numbers of churches and the numbers of companies continues to grow. There are about 60,000 churches in the world. That's a lot of churches. And there's new members being added every day. We're baptizing almost 3,000 members a day in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Praise God. That's fantastic. We have the SDA versus the world population. So we're growing faster than the world population rate. That's what that means. So the margin between world population and SDAs is going down. That's good news. It would be terrible if there were more babies being born than people being baptized, but it's not the case. So that's good. Here's some bad news. Because normally, through the Adventist media, we only get the good news. So here's some bad news. Here's our church membership to world population. That's bad news. We barely exist. 20 million compared to 7 billion is just like a drop in the bucket. Istanbul, where I have often spent time, has got a population of 20 million. So if you could imagine one city, one large city like Istanbul or Mexico City or something, being entirely Adventist, and the rest of the world has absolutely no Adventist presence. That would be the equivalent of our impact. And just the same statistic in another form. Here is a picture of the unreached. So according to this bar graph, there are about 2 billion people that would be in unreached. And according, of course, unreached has different varying degrees of how you would calculate that. every black dot that you see here is a city that has no SDA presence. And those are cities of 1 million or more population. No SDA known presence in a city of 1 million or more. If you want to know those cities, you can go on the website that I showed you earlier, gotential.org. And our aim is to send tent makers, some professional man or woman, Adventist man or woman, Spirit-filled, to go and live in those cities and work a career, and then by God's grace, they would be the impetus, just like Brad Jolly going to Mongolia, the impetus to start a movement, an Adventist movement there. Maybe you could be one of them. Wouldn't it be powerful to knock one of those out of the map? Do you know, my family did just that. We were living in Izmir with 3 other AFM team members. Now, you remember that picture that I showed you with the beautiful, it was one of the last pictures. It had beautiful mountains right next to a beach, and that city is named Antalya, and it's represented here on this map by one of these black dots right there. And we moved down there because I needed to spend some specific time to strengthen my language. I was so busy with publishing and the church and things in our home city that I wasn't having time to focus on language study like I needed. And so I needed time to get away. So what did we decide to do? Move to an unreached city, no church members there. It would be great. We would spend 4 months. I'd get a language teacher, and I would just focus on language. So we're driving 7 hours away, driving there, and 20 minutes before we arrive in this city of 1 million people, no Seventh-day Adventists, I get a phone call. And it's a phone call from somebody that I have never met before. And he got on Facebook and found a guy who was on Facebook who he was asking questions about Seventh-day Adventism. That guy knew who I was, gave this stranger who's now on the phone my phone number, and said to me, he says, "Hello, I live in Antalya. I would like to study with a Seventh-day Adventist. Are there any Seventh-day Adventists in Antalya?" I was 20 minutes away. Before they call, I will answer. That's what the Bible says. Jesus had arranged this whole thing. Miracle of miracles. Some Christian friends who lived in the city, I said there are no Seventh-day Adventists. There were Christians there. They had arranged, and by the way, when you're in an unreached area, every Christian is your brother and sister, because the fact you have a commonality of love for Christ is just like a dear friend. They had arranged for a place for us to stay. That place for us to stay was just 5 minutes from this boy's house who was calling me on the phone saying he wanted to study the Bible. Why had I gone there? To get away from ministry. You know that within 3 weeks, God put it together that we had 8 people meeting in our living room on Sabbaths. It was unbelievable. We single-handedly, through the power of Jesus, wiped this little black dot off the map. Now, I can say that we didn't start a church, but we did start a home fellowship that continues on. We baptized one girl there, a Moldavian woman married to a Turkish man, and that young man who called me on the phone, he wants to be a pastor now in the Adventist church, and it's just a miracle. I could tell you more stories, but that's not the point of this lecture. The reason I tell you that story is, what does it take to turn a city from a black dot to one having an Adventist presence? You got to go there. And God will arrange the miracles. That's His job. But you just go and see what happens. Uh-oh. We'll try that. Fortunately, it wasn't loaded. Okay. The goal of AFM evangelism is people group movements and worldview transformation. Now, this is where we really are different than just an evangelistic machine that is working to do evangelistic series. Our aim is really to get local people to evangelize their native population. So our aim is really to find one or two quality individuals who will become leaders in that society, disciple them well, and then train them to be able to evangelize their own people. What does it mean, worldview transformation? A worldview is that lens by which we see society around us. And as Adventists, we understand a worldview. It's the reason that I'm standing up here in a suit and a tie on a Sabbath afternoon. We have a worldview that is about a great controversy, and included in that is about holiness, and included in that is sacred time and sacred space. And included in our worldview is a cosmic warfare between Christ and His angels and Satan and his angels. It includes a creation plan and a destination where we're going to arrive in a new earth with new bodies. That's all of our worldview, isn't it? That's how we see things. It's why I can fly from America and show up and stand on a stage and talk to you, and you can be nodding your head, because I have a worldview that's been shaped through the writings of the Bible, through Ellen White and other Adventist authors, and you have similar shaping influences, and we can find each other and come into agreement. Does that make sense? That's why I can marry a Polish wife, and she's got a totally different culture, very different from mine, but we can work together and find happiness because she grew up in an Adventist home, her dad's a seminary professor, I grew up in an Adventist home, and there's an appreciation of the same values. I don't know what that picture means, but I liked it. Here's another one. Now take a look at that. Now, what do you see here? Okay, can you see that is an Eskimo walking into or is that an Indian's face? And there's his nose out there. What? Can you see that? There's some of you are struggling. This is the back of the Eskimo, and here's his coat, and here's his little mitten and his boot, and he's walking into a cave. Yeah, oh. So I know why I put that picture there, is because it's about suddenly seeing something you didn't see before. And missions is trying to help people see the world through new eyes that they didn't see before, that they would have an aha moment. What do you see there? Have you met that guy? And so, when you are reaching people, sometimes you have to go to extraordinary lengths to find out how they see the world. Now, I hope this will work here. Take a look at this little video. The English believe it's a slur on your host's hospitality not to clear your food. And the Chinese feel it's a slur on your host's hospitality if you finish your food. So you see that guy, he was in a real situation that his culture said, finish your bowl. He could just hear his mother there saying, if you're going to be polite, you've got to eat all your food, right? And the Chinese were like, man, I want to provide so much for this man that he couldn't possibly finish it, but they were so surprised. Well, culture shows up in a lot of different parts of life. So we have some cultures that are more task-oriented versus people-oriented. Can you think of a country that would be more task-oriented than people-oriented?
Germany.
Okay, Germany, maybe. Yeah, probably. What? You think of China that way? Yeah? Okay. People-oriented would be like maybe Sweden is people-oriented? Okay, good. I was thinking of Italy, where they just, mamma mia, and in Turkey, they're very much people-oriented. So they will stop everything to drink tea with you, and they'll do it again and again. The task doesn't matter. Let's get some tea some tea time together, and they'll stop, they'll drink tea, and because the task doesn't mean anything. Now this comes into conflict in business when you go and try to make a business deal and you're task oriented. You're like, let's take a look at this contract and sign right here and everything, and the people are people oriented. They're like, what kind of guy is this? All he wants to do is talk about business, and you can really turn people off. Well, the same thing in missions is you can turn people off if you are not focused on what they're focused. So if I go into a situation and I am just focused on studying the Bible, and I don't take any time to bring them a gift, prepare a little gift, sit with them, drink their tea, eat their fruit, eat their dessert, and talk. First question I need to ask is about their family. I need to ask about their uncle, and I need to ask about their aunt, and about their grandpa and their grandma. And I ask all these questions before I get down to business. It's important if you want to be effective. There's other types. There's a group versus individual. And in America, we're very individualistic, whereas some societies, the group is so important. I was watching one cultural vignette which was showing how a man was at a business deal, and there was a Korean who had come all the way from Korea to work through a business contract with a man. The man was supposed to be at his son's swimming meet. His son was in a competition for swimming, and he skipped the swimming match to go to be at the business meeting so he could meet with this Korean man. During the middle of the supper that they're together, the Korean man asks about his son's, the man's family, and the man begins to describe his family, and then he proudly, coming from an individualistic society, this American tells to the Korean how he skipped his son's swimming match to be able to be at the business meeting. How do you think the Korean man felt about that? Totally turned off. Felt that he could not trust this man for a business partner because he put business above family, which told him he didn't want to sign a contract with him. Interesting, huh? High versus low context, direct and indirect communication. That gets a lot of people in big trouble, is this indirect communication. People giving slight signals to be polite that are misread. Spontaneous versus planned hospitality. What are some of the cultural pieces that missionaries have to think about as they're putting together their strategies? Ceremonies, rituals, laws, thoughts, patterns, concepts of self, arts, social institutions, myths, legends, morals, and ideals. How do you think it is if you go into a society that has high context, meaning that they have a lot of rituals, they have a lot of ceremonies, and now as an Adventist, we come in and we have no ceremony about birth. We have no ceremony about a boy arriving at age 12. We have no ceremony about planting gardens. All of this stuff has been part of their rituals. They have rituals about everything. If a person gets sick, they have a ritual. And if a person is given away an engagement, they have a ritual. And all of those rituals are tied somehow spiritually with their ancestors or spiritually with the demon world. And now as Adventists, we come in and we say, no rituals. The only ritual is baptism and communion. And this is how it's to be. And so, there it is. Their boy is coming up to age 12. There's not to be any ritual. And normally they would have quite a big affair. You saw that boy on the horse with the money around his neck? That's a huge event. How do you think they're going to feel? Never passed into manhood. All their neighbors and friends, bad parents, bad people. They begin to feel weird about themselves. In fact, they begin to import the old customs secretly into their household to try to merge what they used to do with their new belief of Adventism, and pretty soon you have a synchronistic world. So what Adventist Frontier missionaries try to do is they figure out what rituals can we take that we would not use their old rituals. We don't want to do that. That's basically what Catholicism tried to do when they imported the kissing of the saints and this kind of thing. But rather, we say, okay, if in their old rituals, when they would plant a garden, they would bring the witch doctor and he would wave certain feathers over this garden or whatever, and they believed in that power. Would it be wrong for us that when somebody plants a garden, that we invite the church members together and they would kneel together and they would pray to God and ask that God would bless their garden? Would that be appropriate? We discuss that and ponder that, and we think that would be a good alternative. Or we would bring in some ritual that maybe is like the baby dedication. We do baby dedications as a Adventist ritual. Is there a way that we could customize this that would uniquely satisfy those people's needs in their culture? And that's very important, because if a person just goes in, lays over a strong, don't do this, and do this, without an analysis, very likely that we would have something called synchronization. Synchronization. What was synchronization? Blending. Yeah, that's right. Blending. So you got the occultic witch doctor ideas, and what happens is a lot of times people who come into Adventist faith in Africa, New Guinea, Philippines, some place like that, and they'll be just going along fine until the point of crisis. And then when there's a crisis, let's say their child gets deathly sick, then because we don't have an Adventist way of dealing with deathly sick people, now I'm saying we do, but in their evangelist never taught them that. And so where are they going to take that deathly sick child? Yeah, take them to the witch doctor, because they had a solution for the problem. May not be a good one, but they had one. So we ask these questions. How does the home culture reveal its worldview in the art and the music and foods and the clothing, entertainment, etc., etc.? Well, here's what worldview actually looks like. And we see behaviors are very observable, right? We can see how people act and what they do. I'm wearing a suit today with a tie. That's a behavior, okay? What's a value that's driving that behavior? Let's use my suit as an illustration. What is the value that drives me wearing a very hot suit on a day like this? Professionalism, good. Respect, Traditions. Let's go a little deeper than traditions. Value, the value. Anything about Sabbath? Anything that today is an important day, holy day? We're standing in a church. Those would be all different values that I would have that would probably drive that. Why the tie? That comes somehow through a cultural norm that's been passed on and probably traditions of Western society. What are the beliefs that are underlying those values? Okay, wearing a tie on Sabbath is more formal, yeah? It's the best I have, so therefore I would want to do my best on this day for the Lord and in front of people, yeah? That's a belief system, sure. And so then the worldview that would drive that is to give my very best for the Lord. My worldview is that God is sovereign, that maybe even talking about conformity would be important, because there are other ways that I could dress nicely, isn't there? But I somehow have conformed to a social norm that is customary in this culture. So I could have worn some sort of tuxedo or a black shirt with a button-up thing, or like most priests, I have a little white thing here, you know. So conformity in my worldview somehow comes in there. So in this diagram, there are things about every people group that are deeper than what is seen. And that takes a lot of digging to figure out. Your worldview is your basic belief system. Your worldview is the position you take regarding the answers to the major questions in life, such as, does God exist and is He good? What can be known for sure? Who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? What do I value? What is important to me? And is there purpose and direction to life? So, here working in Norway and Sweden and this area, these are questions that are very important if you really want to try to figure out how to reach a modern person. What are the answers that drive those questions? Because we all know that it's hard to evangelize, but it's partially because we're addressing a worldview that doesn't exist for the people anymore. And if we are trying to hit at a worldview that doesn't exist, then our answers aren't meeting their questions. Does that make sense? Does that mean the Bible's irrelevant? No, it just means that our presentation of the Bible isn't very strategic. So we can think of this as an onion. Behavior is what is done. Values are what is best for me. And beliefs are what is true. I see you all taking notes on this lecture in your fruit notes. You can write this in because it's an onion. It's close, you know. It's what is true is your beliefs. And worldview answers what is real. What is real. And so you can see that as you're working with somebody, you may try to transform what is done, changing their behavior, but if you don't really change what is true for them, or what their reality is, you haven't done anything. Right? Does that make sense? So, what is worldview? You have this guy looking through the world through, this is your missionary. He has his own worldview, his own glasses, and he sees the world through blue glasses. This is your native man, and he's seeing the world through his green worldview glasses. They are looking at the same event with totally different view. Let me give you an illustration of this. I'm in Turkey, and I see my close, the one who was baptized through who was a bartender. Now he's married to a non-Adventist wife, Turkish Muslim wife, and she is got Muslim, Turkish parents, of course. Well, I noticed that his daughter's arm is totally, the skin on it is totally burned. The skin is healed, but it's totally burned. And his daughter was just 4 years old at the time. I said, "What happened to your daughter?" And he said, "My daughter was near the stove, and my mother-in-law accidentally pulled the pot of boiling water off the stove, and it burned my daughter's arm." And I said, "This is terrible. I'm so sorry." He said, "Yes, it was a real tragedy." And I said, what did your mother-in-law say? What did she do?" And she said, "Well, this is fate." That's a different worldview. So she was seeing this tragedy as God's will. How can I fight against that? God has done this. Oh, now how would my worldview would be, "Oh, it's such a tragedy. I'm so sorry. I can't believe I did this." If I was that mother-in-law, right? "Oh, my little precious darling." And every time I would look at her arm, I would think about myself and how I was responsible for that. Not in their worldview. God did this. That's fate. Different worldview. Same event, different lenses. Does that make sense? Now, fate in Turkish society is sort of the heart of their worldview, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that more. I don't know. But, okay, let me show you a success story here from Papua New Guinea. This is Dale Goodson. Dale is one of our best missionaries. He has graduated. He worked 12 years in New Guinea and earned his stripes. It's hard work in New Guinea. I mean, just even getting around, it's constantly muddy. There's huge snakes. There's crocodiles. There's violent men with machetes. I mean, it's just hard work. And you go out to these villages. There's mosquitoes everywhere. You've got to eat food that's just awful, and the people are unclean. There's demons, that are continually threatening people's lives. You get maggots and worms. It's just hard. And this is hard. And Dale went there, and his family worked so diligently. Well, after the first furlough, he'd given Bible studies like a maniac. They speak what's called pidgin English. So the language learning isn't so hard there. And within a short time, he'd gotten pidgin English, gave Bible studies, leaves on his first furlough after 3 years, and has a church. He's so happy. He's got, 30 baptisms or something like this. He says over 400 Bible studies, hundreds of interests, 28 baptisms. So he goes home, raising money, telling stories. He's so happy. And then 100% backslide in only 4 months. He comes back to New Guinea, finds the church is empty. And he's like, "What happened?" You see, what had happened was he had changed their outward behavior, but he hadn't changed their worldview, right? So let's take a look here. So Dale then begins to attack the problem, and he begins to analyze and question, and he sits with the elders and he asks questions, and he begins to realize that cultural transformation is a much harder core problem. So here's Dale teaching some of the men there, and watch as this conversation progresses. The missionary believes God is love and wants to protect us. Now, here's the listener's wall of interpretation. That wall of interpretation is his worldview. That sickness is a form of immediate spiritual, there's a word left off here, spiritual, what manifestation? No, punishment. Spiritual punishment. Sickness is a form of immediate spiritual punishment that the demons are somehow attacking you. So, here's what Dale says. Smoking causes cancer. God wants us to be healthy. So, He doesn't want us to smoke. Is that a true statement? Sounds like any good Adventist New Start advocate. Now, here's what this native guy is thinking. He says, God must be angry with smokers and has vengefully punished them with cancer. I am afraid of God. If I am good, maybe He will go away and leave me alone. Now, for a long time while I was in Turkey, I would introduce myself, and then my friend Ekber would introduce me, and we would talk in front of the person, and Ekber would say, "This man doesn't eat any pork. This man is a very, very good man. He doesn't drink any alcohol." And I would stand there and smile, and I'd be so happy to be introduced that way, because I was thinking I'm winning commonality with them. I don't eat pork. Muslims don't eat pork. He would say, you know, he's faithful to his wife. He does this, and I would smile. But what I learned was that what they were hearing was, this man is earning his way to heaven, and he's ahead of me. Different worldview entirely. I wasn't earning points. Instead, with them, instead I was being perceived as somebody who is earning his way to heaven, and that I was far advanced from them. Well, here's another guy's thoughts. I smoked and didn't get sick right away. God must have different rules for our territory than in the white man's. Okay, so here is another one. Think about the way God has been leading in your life. That's what Dale says. Here's what the people hear. When I ate pig, smoked, and chewed betel nut, I didn't get sick. But when I trapped on the Sabbath, a tree fell on my head. God must be angry about the Sabbath, but not everything else. It's hard to even get your mind into the mindset of those people. But can you see, if there's direct spiritual consequences for the ways that God is interacting with you, then those things that have consequences must be bad. Those things that don't have consequences must not be bad. This is one of Dale's elders gave this testimony. Christianity was a very small package compared to animism. So animism had explanations for everything. Christianity, we have a very simple explanation. There is God, there is Satan. And God does this, Satan does this. In their worldview, there was a multitude, and so it didn't seem like a very good substitute for them. It didn't answer the questions they were asking. In animism, spirituality is in everything, and we talked a little bit about this. So they have spirituality in their birth. The spirituality is in their workplace, in their sickness, in their marriage, in their celebrations. And with Christianity, spirituality is separate from daily life. You see this? So spirituality may come into your sickness, but it's not a spiritual thing. For an animist, sickness is entirely 100% spiritual. Same thing, celebrations. We have lots of secular celebrations. Not one in their culture is a secular celebration. It's all spiritual. So the missionary task has to figure out, okay, these are a spiritual people, and we need to make their entire culture spiritual. We can't just introduce Adventism into a subset of their spirituality. And if what we do is we introduce that marriage has family worship, but the larger part of marriage of shopping and fixing doing the laundry and all this stuff has no spiritual value. Well, in their culture it does. And those are important questions for the missionary to tackle. Well, I think my time is up. What time am I supposed to be done, Christian? 8:30? Half past 7? Oops. Sorry, friends. Well, it's been nice to be here. I probably won't be coming back to Norway real soon, but God bless you, and I hope that you have grand success in your mission, wherever it is. Thank you.